Hello, and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show, featuring Jason Zook. In uncertain times, we must change our focus and priorities. This show will highlight social justice issues with the goal of expanding minds and increasing unity, love, and mutual respect for ourselves and our planet. We support the Black Lives Matter movement. Our show aspires to promote social spirituality, which simply means that by coming together, we can solve any of our problems, including the goal of bringing an end to all forms of hate, discrimination, bias, or oppression. We must protect our environment, reform our criminal justice system, and protect every citizen from police brutality. When we come together, it becomes possible to bridge the gaps that plague our society and divide us from within. We the people means everyone.
Hello and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show. This is Jason Zook. It's a great pleasure I have the opportunity of presenting special guest Marc Ritorto to the show today, host of the Marc The Shark MMA Show podcast, as well as a best-selling author. He has four daughters, as well as also a musician, writer, martial artist, and podcaster, as I mentioned before. I'm excited to have Marc on the show to talk about his background and experience, his personal journey, where he's gone through so many facets of his life to become where he is now. And I love to have this type of stuff featured on the show because I feel like it's very inspiring for all of us. So without further ado, it's with great pleasure I welcome Marc to the show. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Thanks, Jason. How you doing?
Great. I'm great. Can you tell our audience where you began your motivation to start your path of where you are now? Like, I know that might be kind of one of those heavy loaded questions, but like, in other words, when did you first realize that you wanted to do the things that you set out to do?
Well, basically I've always been involved in martial arts, and about, what are we in, 2021, I would say about 2, maybe 3 years ago, I have a really bad injured foot. Actually, what happened was I got, and during one of my training sessions, my partner stepped back somehow and my thumb got smashed back. But that wasn't the injury that set me back. I figured, all right, let me rest my hand, and then my foot just got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore, just by coincidence. So during my layover, which was over a year, I needed something to keep my mind off it. Those who know me, jiu-jitsu was like a great passion of mine. Like if I always dreamed of being able to do it full time, but obviously that never happened because I have like 4 kids to feed. And I got back into it when I was in my 40s. Like I did it in my 30s, got injured, laid off 6 years, had married, got kids, went back. I was like 41. Then I got back into it for a good about 8 years, and then bam, I got injured again. So during that time, I needed something to keep my mind off it. So I'm like, let me start a podcast. Let me start back. I kind of started it before I got injured, actually. But then I got injured, and I'm like, well, you know what? Let me turn this into the full time, like focus my energy on that, because I couldn't do it for a year. And then COVID hit, so I went back, and then COVID came out, and then I was like, all right, I got to see where this is going. I don't know if that was a sign saying don't go back to jiu-jitsu. So I pretty much used the podcast as a way to still stay involved with the martial arts, but not from a physical sense, just being able to talk to MMA fighters, interview, high skill level jiu-jitsu fighters. And then at the same time, my daughter wrote a book. I helped her publish it. She was at 10 or I think she was 10 or 11 at the time. And she wrote 2 or 3 books. She published them. And I'm like, you know what, let me give it a shot. And then that's where I came up with, shows up, the Cabal, the Saga Begins, which by coincidence, I started 10 years before. I just never finished it. It actually started out, I wanted it to be just a full-fledged martial arts story, but then it became like an action, suspense, conspiracy, thriller novel. And then I also came out during my injury. I came out with the second book. I wrote, which is called Marcus the Vampire, which for me was more of what was going on in my life. I put it more into that book. The Kabbalah Saga Begins does have martial arts in it, but at that, it was mostly, I wrote it to deal with a personal friend of mine who's, he still has cancer and he was battling it.
Sorry.
So I was kind of writing it to keep my mind off that. Like I said, there's a martial, like I would say all the males in the story have a martial arts background. Like one guy's a ninja, the FBI agent is an amateur MMA fighter, and then the cop, John Esposito, he's a boxer. So all the male roles, there's some female roles in there, but they don't have combat skills. So they try to fight off a terrorist group known as the Cabal, and they end up saving the day. So that's just a summarized story of that. Then I wrote Marcus the Vampire, which helped me deal with my injury, dealing with the transformation. It was kind of like a big thing for me, trying to deal with getting old and not being able to go back. So the character Marcus is undergoing a transformation. It takes place about a gypsy during World War II era. He gets captured, imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp, which not too many people know. A lot of people just associate the concentration camp with people of Jewish descent, but there were a lot of people from Romani descent. The layman term, but most people refer to them as gypsies. So I'm like, oh, found that out. And I was like, oh, gypsies are always in vampire and werewolf movies, which I always had a passion for. I always loved those. Are like my favorite type of movies. So I wrote about it, and then I'm like, I just related what I was going through to what that guy was going through. He was going through changes with being terrorized by the Nazis and losing his family, and then he's got to fight to survive, and then he just survives miraculously, just by chance, because his grandmother happens to be a witch. Most gypsies are witches, right? In most movies, and then she always had a protective curse on him. So when the Nazis try to kill him, instead of getting killed, he gets turned into a vampire. And then the whole rest of the book is based on him trying to protect his daughter from the Nazis, as well as the creatures of what I call the Dark Worlds. Hence the series, the name Dark World Chronicles, which is witches, werewolves, and vampires. So I've been trying to work on a sequel for these two books. It's been a very slow process. My other interests kind of came more into fruition. That's where the music came in. I actually started doing guitar about the same time when I got back into jiu-jitsu in my 40s. But when COVID hit, I'm like, can't do jiu-jitsu. My foot body was feeling better, but I was afraid to catch anything. I mean, I know there were guys still training, but I didn't want to catch it because I'm older. I didn't want to give it to anybody
exactly
older. I felt that would have been irresponsible. And at that time, they didn't have the vaccine. So I put whatever time I would have put into that, into focusing more on the guitar and piano. I actually started taking piano lessons when I first stopped jiu-jitsu from my injury. Then when COVID hit, I stopped that. So I just been doing it on my own. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Just trying to keep my mind and body active. I mean, now that we got the COVID vaccine, I've been going back to the gym, getting back in shape. This actually just got stem cell therapy in both my knees. So hopefully that works. Because we'll find out. I still don't know if I'm going back to jiu-jitsu. Like the common sense says, stay home. So I'm going nuts because I'm realizing now that because I met the guy that I work and stuff. So a lot of the guys that I know, there's guys that train like it's their livelihood, but it's really not. So they have time to sleep in late and recover and do yoga, whatever it takes for their body to recover to do yoga. I don't have that luxury. During the time I was doing it, I was getting, I was losing weight and getting ripped in the gut, but I was losing muscle mass because I couldn't lift heavy because your body's always messed up,
I'll say this.
Stepping on your biceps and ripping out your arm and choking you and stuff like that takes a toll on the body. So now I'm like, I'm getting my strength back. I don't know. We'll see. I got to make that decision in 2 weeks, I guess.
All the things that you've described that you do between the various aspects of your life, between jujitsu and podcasting, writing, music, those are all creative endeavors. They all show a certain level of creative energy that you have within you that you need to express through various means and measures in order to, I feel like, let it out and express it. And I wanted to see if you've ever actually thought of it that way, that you have an immense amount of creative energy or energy that helps you to express it in all these different ways, that gives you the ability and opportunity to create a lot of things that an average person would look at you and say, wow, you're creating a lot. But for you, it's you being you.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because throughout my whole life, it was always, martial arts. I wish I did guitar when I was a kid, but, from when I was 7 to like 9 or something, and I kind of got out of it. That was before YouTube. And now,
TikTok.
It's a lot easier now. And then you're seeing like these guys shredding, and you're watching like the guys from the 80s. And I don't know. I just got back into it. I'm like, I started out just buying a cheap chunk, shitty guitar. Now I got like 13 guitars here. And that was the other thing. During COVID, I was buying guitars like crazy. Like I was on crack, buying and selling guitars, getting up in bills. And I was doing it all sight unseen because you couldn't go to the store, right? Well, everything was locked down. So, and then the other thing I did, starting 3 or 4 months ago, I actually started another podcast to talk about everything outside the realm of MMA. Because,
let's talk about your podcast, because we didn't really get into that too much. I know it's great to have a fellow podcaster on the show, because I know it's a special thing you do when you podcast. You express yourself in a way. The idea comes and formulates in your mind for an episode. You put it together and you create it. I want to ask you, for your sake, what is the most rewarding aspect of you podcasting that you found has really helped transform your life in a positive way?
I would think in general, but whichever one, especially during the lockdown, was actually being able to talk to people.
Yeah, it's a vehicle, right?
I mean, you got to understand, before the lockdown, I was out of my house 3 or 4 days a week, training, doing jiu-jitsu, going to the gym, going to the office and work. Now I'm locked down, and I got all girls in my family, so I got to get out. I needed some male bonding, man. I'm like, can't deal with all the family, female drama, all the female hormones. I got to get out. But I would say being able to talk to people, especially in the beginning with the MMA podcast, I would say helping the MMA fighters promote themselves, because a lot of them don't really know how to do it.
That's vital. So important.
Yeah, they're trying to make a living off this. Some of them don't really know how to promote themselves, to get a name out there. So I see myself as a vehicle for them to help themselves. And then for the other podcast, I actually started a YouTube channel too. I'll get into that in a second. My MMA show always had a YouTube channel, and I stream live. Like actually I'm streaming today after this. With the other podcast, it's more like I'm helping out businesses trying to promote themselves. Try to help musicians and other YouTubers out there trying to get their name out there. And then I find it interesting too, because either podcast, sometimes I get the occasional celebrity, so to speak, whatever the realm is. Like for the MMA podcast, I've got to interview a couple of UFC fighters, people I would have never met if I've never had a podcast. And then I've actually came very close to meeting one of my idols in the realm of martial arts, Chuck Norris. I came very close. I got his best friend, Richard Norton. Which is the best I can do. I'm going to ask him if he can introduce me to Jackie Chan.
Well, let me ask you about that. Having a podcast and trying to get certain guests that you want, because I do that too. Like you have your dream list of who you would love to have on the show, right? And then you got I feel like every guest that comes on is a great guest for me, because most of the stuff aligns with the show.
Well, for me, you got to think of it. A lot of it I'm doing for the guests, right? Like because they're unknowns, but then you get a chance to meet someone who is known, like. For instance, Rick Norton. If you're into any like 80s martial arts movie, whether it was with Jackie Chan, and he did a lot of movies with Chuck Norris. He actually does what's Suicide Squad? He's a fight coordinator on Suicide Squad recently, and the Black Widow movie. He's been doing it since the 70s, man, and he's been there and done that. Anyway, it was a great conversation with him. And then, then you also get to meet fellow, musicians and YouTubers. I interviewed a guy on my other podcast, which was called Marc The Shark Show, keyboardist for the 80s band Survivor.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Also, out there, if there's anybody listening to this podcast, if you were ever a member of a famous 80s band, hit me up. Because what I do is I put it on my YouTube channel. It's called The Rockin' with Marc. Rockin' with Marc is the name of the YouTube channel. And then I take that and I put it on a Marc The Shark Show. So it's like interesting. You get to meet people that you like, Survivor, Rocky, I Had a Tiger.
Exactly.
Right? And it was really weird because at that time I was watching the Cobra Kai Karate Kid show on Netflix with my kid. And it just so happens that this guy was actually in the original Karate Kid movie too. He had a small acting role in it. Played one of the kids that Ralph Macchio grew up with. So it was weird. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. You're meeting people, you get to chat with people, and then you're helping them out, you get them exposure, because your podcast is getting listened to throughout the world and so forth. So I think that's the benefit. And then sometimes you learn things too.
I get different things sometimes. So I'll just tell you this intuitively. I'm going to tell you that you'll probably be doing production stuff in the future too. I wouldn't be surprised if you don't do some type of video production stuff down the road or be involved in a project.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I like to do that. I actually was, when I did my first book, Cabal, the Saga Begins, I actually looked into screenwriting. But you got to be careful with that. A lot of those people I get calls all the time. Oh, let's turn your book into a movie, but I think they're scam artists. You know what I mean?
There's gonna be something I think you might get approached with or have an opportunity with that might be beneficial. And maybe
yeah. So then I was like, well, maybe I'll do my own thing or something. But I don't know. You need time. There's only so many hours in the day.
Where do you see your path going in the future? Do you see yourself continuing to do these multiple roles, or do you see yourself focusing more on something else?
Well, that I gotta see, because we'll see. I think the big deciding factor is if I go back into jiu-jitsu. It all depends on how my body feels. If I go back and I get the same euphoric feeling that I had when I was doing it before my injury, chances are that's going to take up a lot of my time. Okay. So we'll see. I mean, I like to keep doing my Rockin' with Marc YouTube channel. I don't want to say it's not as time intensive, but you're not obligated to put out an episode every. I don't want to say obligated. I don't know about your show, but I try to put out something every week. The YouTube channel,
it's a process. I have a YouTube channel and I don't do it the best. I have this other stuff and then I focus on that. I'm trying to focus more of my efforts on that in the future, but it's acclimating to all these different social media is a process by itself. When you create your own little branding, right? It's a whole process.
Oh yeah. Don't even get started on that. Yeah. Unless you're just unless you really want to take the gamble and just pay companies to do it. But I still don't understand that. I'm trying to get a guy on my other show to talk about social media marketing.
That's a whole process. It's a whole universe. The algorithms and everything else, it's like foreign language.
And it changes, and you could be spending money and not get anything.
And who controls that? That's always the interesting part. Who creates those algorithms for social media?
The same thing with writing a book. I mean, if you're writing a book, the only good thing about I like about going through Amazon, I mean, it's listed other places, but Amazon, you can actually advertise your book within Amazon.
Yeah.
But your book's shown, but it's shown with other books. So then you're still competing, but at least you get shown more.
Yeah.
Kind of. But to me, the marketing is the hardest thing.
What have you found, since you have self-published to Amazon, what have you found to be your the greatest challenge for that and the greatest reward?
It's the marketing. I used to do a lot of podcast interviews. This is probably the first one I've done in a while. Promote to talk about my books. I used to do it a lot with my daughter. She doesn't like doing any interviews. She got older now, so she's kind of out of that. So now I just put little audio ads on my podcast. So I guess that's like another benefit. Like
hopefully you'll get some reaction from our show.
Free ads, free advertising for that. That's the hardest part, I think. Writing a book is time consuming. Editing the book's a pain in the ass. But marketing is the hardest, unless you don't care about spending your money. Because you could be spending a lot of money just to sell a book, just to make a few bucks. And there's a
trade-offs got to balance.
I still don't get that. That's one of the reasons why I've never opened up my own business yet, because I was like, I kind of always wanted to be my own boss, but the advertising, you could be spending I know a guy that spends like $50,000 a year on social media advertising. And just because you spend that doesn't mean you get it.
Exactly.
Get it back. And that's not including what he spends for search engine stuff, which I think would probably be a little better, but that's only if, the guy who's doing it for you is good and you got the nice keyword. To me, it's all baffling. Like I always said, I would have like an online business, but then the money you save on rent, you could be spending on marketing.
Let me ask you this. When it comes to what you've done for training over the years and your ability to focus and have like the ability to really, for jiu-jitsu, for example, martial arts, how would you explain that to our audience? Like your level of focus and your ability to pay attention to things as an athlete. How does that differ from what, say, there's somebody who's aspiring in the audience who would like to do that or pick that up? What recommendation would you give them about how to develop their own focus so that they can be better in sports?
No matter what the martial art is, whether it's traditional like karate or kung fu or whatever, there's always, from day one, you're going to learn discipline, right? But that's what your instructor is going to teach you. But the main thing that I think, particularly with jiu-jitsu and I would say more combative martial arts like boxing or Thai boxing, that separates it from the other ones is, especially if you got an ego, you're going to notice you're going to want to get better. And the only way to get better is to be disciplined about your training. And that comes with consistency. That I would say, which you can apply to anything. Like if you want to get better at something, you have to practice it and train for it. So that always practice makes perfect. There's no better truth, because you'll see guys that start. I know a guy that's only been doing it for, I think, 6 years or 8 years, and he got his black belt in jiu-jitsu, and the average time is normally like 10.
Wow.
This kid, he lives and breathes it. He trains like 2 to 3 times a day. Well, he's not really a kid. I think he's like probably like 28, 29, 30. But I mean, he started when he was in his 20s. He's got the time to do it. No kids, no obligation. But the point is, you're in there and you kind of have to focus, because the guy is focusing on tapping you out, right? And then you get tapped out, you learn, but then you go home and you're like, oh shit, I don't want to get tapped out like that again. How do I learn how to beat that? And the only way you go like, oh, I got to get better at this particular, and then you got to go back. Now once a week, twice a week, 3 times. I think the rule of thumb, they usually say, I mean, there's always, what was that, like 10,000 hours or something?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Which is normally like 10 years. Someone told me, if you break it up, I don't know if that's like 10 hours a week.
You become an expert at something at that level, and you become the mastery of it.
Yeah. But I've also heard that you got to do something consistent at least 3 times, right? So if you do it more than 3 times, you're obviously going to get better. So to answer your question, the discipline gets instilled from the training, because you have to act a certain way within the class. You're going to learn how to interact with people, which you'll take on in other avenues. The main thing you learn from the martial arts in general is respect, right? You will learn that day one. When you step on a jiu-jitsu mat, if you go in there and you got that cocky attitude, someone's going to
knock it out of you.
Choke it out of you. And that's the other thing. You learn there's always someone better than you. So what you'll see is these guys, particularly when they get older, because the more you do it, the more you get tapped out, the more humbled you are, right? I don't care.
Life lesson right there.
Unless you're like a protege and you're that young champion, like there's a couple of them out there. But I guarantee you, once he hits 30, his body starts changing and the younger dog starts smashing his ass. Yeah. So you'll learn that really quick, you know.
That's very humbling as well. That's a good experience for you to have that ability to learn the respect and the discipline and to focus and do all those things.
Yeah. Humility is key, man. Do you follow Joe Rogan at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know he's a martial artist as well.
Yeah.
There's one, I don't know if it's a speech he gives. There's something he talks about jiu-jitsu or whatever, but then there's another one that he says about something that he wished he had learned. He didn't learn until he was 50 or something, 40. And then he was talking about that, you know, like treating others with respect, which you learn from martial arts. Being healthy, you learn from the martial arts. And being nice to others, which you got no choice if you're going to keep going back to the same school. Right?
You also learn confidence too, I believe. Self-confidence.
Yeah, because I'll give you a good example. There's some guys that I've met from a martial arts journey that when they started, they were all like, I would say shy or soft-spoken, but as they got more confident in themselves, defending themselves, they become more confident. No matter what the martial arts. I mean, I'm speaking about my experience, limited experience in Thai boxing. The one kid I'm thinking about actually became a Thai champion, like for the Northeast Coast. I remember when I first met him, he was very shy and quiet. Then like 10 years later, he's very, very outgoing, outspoken. And the same thing in jiu-jitsu. I think it's very important for men and women to learn how to defend themselves.
Absolutely.
I think it's Henzo's brother, Half, that says, he's like, you need to know it because one day someone's going to want to take something for you. But I mean, that may not happen, but it's always good to have something to fall back on.
Could save your life.
Yeah.
Or someone else's.
Yeah. There's countless stories of martial arts. The artists had to defend someone in a real life situation. A lot of cops benefit from it on their job.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to ask you this too. How about the aspect of martial arts that's mental? The component of it that you have to have that concentration, the discipline that you mentioned. There's a physical training to it, the eating healthy, but then there's also the meditative aspects of it, I believe, or like the mindset of what you do when you get on the mat. Don't you have a certain mindset you kind of employ at that point? I feel like for anyone that's described what they do on the mat, they say they kind of go in the zone, they call it.
When you're saying go into the zone, there's a term for it where the mind has no mind, or you kind of let your body go. You're just pretty much acting on reflexes. But in terms of the mental aspect, how can I say it? You know what's going to happen. Your body won't be able to do anything unless the mind controls it, right? Because it's your thought process that controls your movements. And a good example of that, I'll give you a scenario. Let's say you're on a mat. You've been doing whatever it is, jiu-jitsu or boxing for a little bit, and you're working out with a guy that's a little bit less skilled than you. So you're most likely going to open up, right? Then comes along a guy that's either bigger than you or more skilled than you, or both. You're not going to be as opened up to do what you would have done on the other guy, right? So mentally, you have to, if you want to learn, you have to hold back your ego and open up, which is very hard to do for a lot of people. But you'll learn that, particularly when you're doing combat sports, jiu-jitsu or Thai boxing, that you have to learn to let the ego go in order to learn, in order to advance. Otherwise, you won't progress far. You'll always stay the same. And then there's other aspects like dealing with injuries. I mean, that was my thing. For the last 8 years up to that one injury. If my thumb never went back, I probably would have still kept going. I mean, my knees would pop, my toes, I jam my fingers, you just tape them up and you just go. I really don't understand why we do it, but it's like a person on crack. It's bad for you, but
the adrenaline.
I don't know what it is. And I to this day, I don't think there's any other martial art where people are as addictive to doing it as it is with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I just don't know. And I don't know. You see guys coming like older than me, coming back from hip surgery, go back. I'm like, what the? You see the Facebook posts, because I belong to a couple of 40s and 50 and older jiu-jitsu groups on Facebook. And I'm like, damn, this guy's knee surgery, that's common, rotator cuff. But hip replacement, I'm like, and these guys are and
they're back.
I don't know what caused the injury from the hip replacement, what caused them to get it, but yeah. So for you to be able to go back on the mat and dealing with the injuries and the stress and then the adrenaline rush, it's all mental because the brain controls everything. If you're going to let your ego get in the way or fear get in the way, that's the other thing, right? If you're a beginner and you're scared of the guy, eventually you overcome that because you get used to it. You just get guard pass, using getting choked. You get more used to it. You learn how to relax in certain positions. I think by going through that, it makes you able to get through things in other aspects of your life.
That's beautiful. If that's the parallel, I would say that I was going to ask you as one of our concluding questions is all the challenges you went through in terms of the things you've done. How have you found it lines up with what you're coming up to now or your goals and tackling future challenges?
I think that it helps because I know what I could do, and it's a matter of putting my mind to it, so to speak. And you just got to have focus and consistency. If there's a particular goal in mind, whether it's for me or for you or whoever's listening to the show, you actually have to take the necessary steps to do it. Whether it's getting better at learning a particular skill or it's learning certain skill sets to help you out in your career, right? If you wanted to switch careers, that's the other thing I do. I actually started teaching people at night, believe it or not. Teach adults how to get into the computer industry because that's what I do in my day job.
Oh, excellent.
They're taking a risk, right? They spent their money. Now, they're probably 30, 40 years old and they're doing totally different career change. So now they got to adjust. They got to learn skill sets. They got to study, prepare themselves, and then they actually got to take the actual leap and try to get a job in that particular field. So again, you have to, one of the things that you can learn through martial arts, especially if you ever competed in it, is the aspect of visualization, trying to use your mind to help you envision the potential outcome that you want, and then mentally train yourself to get there. I'll give you a good example, Chuck Norris. I have one of his books, and one of his books, I think, was Mental Strength. I think it was something like that. And he talks about the first time he ever went into a karate tournament, he lost. But what he did was, for preparing for the next one, obviously he trained hard, but he would also visualize himself competing, right? And obviously you got to have positive thoughts. You can't worry, what happens if I get hurt or injured? He would envision himself, put his mindset into the same mindset he would have while he was sparring during a competition. And he would do it so often that when he got to the competition, he would be less nervous because he already put himself mentally through it.
Right.
So you can do that. There's a lot of, I forget the name of another book. The Way of the Teo. I forget the name. It was another book where these different martial artists use similar mental techniques, to help them through injuries or things through life. one guy broke his, I don't know if it was his arm or something, and he visualized like these little tiny men working on his arm. No, like this meant it, like working on it and watching it heal. I think it was called Zen of the Martial Arts. It's an old book. It's probably like from the 70s or 80s. Okay. I mean, it's good stuff. I mean, I don't know how many people listening to this podcast are into the martial arts, but they got kids. I highly recommend it. I'm actually trying to get my kids into it. I got them into judo for a little bit, but they didn't like grappling aspect because they were like really small, and they got put up with these 12-year-old boys. So they got to figure that out. But if you got kids, it's the best thing for them. You know,
I want to ask you
with any bullying and stuff like that.
We're running low on time, so I want to ask if our audience wants to reach out to you, where would you direct them to reach out to you?
They can reach me very easily on Facebook, either podcast, the Marc The Shark MMA Show Facebook page, or the Marc The Shark Show Facebook page. And remember, it's Marc with a C. And then I also got 2 websites, Ritorto Family Books, where you can buy my book or my daughter's book, or www.markthesharkmmashow.com. Don't have another one for the other podcast yet, but that's my main website. You can hit me on the contact page there, or you can hit me up on a messenger on Facebook, or either Facebook page. Oh, and don't forget to check out my Rockin' with Marc YouTube channel. Again, it's Marc with a C. Want to learn how to play guitar or piano, or see interesting interviews with other YouTubers and musicians? Check it out.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight today and everything we just discussed. And I'm excited to have our audience check out your stuff, order your books, check out your YouTube channel, Facebook page, and everything else. And I'll have that in the program notes as well.
All right, thank you.
I want to thank you for coming on. The last question I'll ask you is, if you were a spirit animal, which spirit animal would you be and why? And I'll let you know, I'll go first because I know we're short on time. I just always say owl, because for me, I always believe in wisdom and looking at things beyond the immediacy of the moment. So that's how I look at stuff for myself.
Oh, spirit animal, huh? Well, I'm going to have to go with my nickname, the Shark.
I was like, makes a lot of sense. Great.
Right? World, my ocean. I'm the king of it.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank Marc for coming on the show today and sharing his many attributes as a writer, as a podcast host, martial artist, musician, best-selling author. Amazing. I love having notable people on the show to share their viewpoints, because I think we can learn from every conversation we have that helps us to look at. One of my takeaways from talking to Marc today is he has a lot of amazing creative energy that he puts in all these different projects, and he creates a lot of very positive things in between his books, his podcast, and his martial arts record. And one of the things I'll tell you is there's no such thing as being bored. You know, one person once told me being bored is when you're laying flat. That's when you're bored. And I think Marc's a good example of that. So check out his information, and the information will be in the show notes. If you want to reach out to me, you can always reach out to me. info@D, socialpsychicradio.com. Stay positive, because when you're positive, anything's possible. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Social Psychic Radio Show. Don't forget to join us for another episode next time. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes. You can also check us out on Facebook, and don't forget to visit the Social Psychic YouTube channel. Until next time, it's a big world out there. Keep an open mind, embrace your paradigms, and know that the universe is always yours to explore.